Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So we're going to get started shortly. Got a great session lined up. Appreciate everyone joining us. Give everyone a couple minutes to hop in from their most recent Zoom meeting, or if they were fortunate enough to get to refill their water in between sessions. Just a quick note to everyone who's joining. So answering one of the most popular questions, yes, we are recording. If you do have to jump or you want to share some of the conversation with your colleagues, we'll be sending this out after the fact. Also, feel free to drop in questions in the Q&A. Our job is, our goal here today is to give you as much actionable advice, thoughts, plans that you can go take back and apply to your role. So we've got some great content lined up, but we would love to really dial this up for your questions and get you rolling. Seeing some familiar names too joining, so excited to have you all here today. Give it about one more minute and then kick things off. All right. I think everybody is trickling in, so I'm sure we'll have more people joining today, but let's go ahead and get going and make sure we make good use of your time. Appreciate everyone joining today. We've got great session lined up. So I want to, thanks for taking your time. I'm Lindsay Tishgard. I'm the CMO here at Mediafly. I lead our marketing efforts and love content. Started my career this way back to, essentially when I think I had my first opportunity to draw color, write all of it. But one of my, anyone who's worked with me or knows I'm really very clear about the fact that content goes both ways. Communication, and you can't just be throwing the content out there. Somebody actually has to receive it. So today we're going to spend a lot of time talking about how we make sure that those messages, the content, whether it's in the conversation, after the conversation, prior to the conversation, is actually being received in the way that you wanted to, and how do you set your sellers up to make that successful. So we'll kick things off. For those of you who don't know Zoetis, if you have a pet, you've likely been a Zoetis customer. So Zoetis sells into veterinarians and other providers a lot of the pet medicines and everything that you need to take care of those furry creatures. So let's kick things off with a little bit of a themed poll. See if we can pop this up. So how much do you spend each holiday season in presents for your pets? Go ahead and share those. See what we have here. And sadly, I can't vote. But I do have a blind dog at home who probably shouldn't see the results of this poll. My thoughts here. All right, let's see what we got. Oh, Matt, can you do us a favor? And there should be a sharing. There we go. Oh, very split. Okay. Only a small percentage who's embarrassed. So it looks like we're all spending, putting the dollars where we have them. So let me go ahead and introduce our guests here today, and you can tell us where you fit on that spectrum. Like to go ahead and kick it off. We've got one of our guest speakers, Peter Ostro, who is VP of Research at Forrester, and Matt Coe from Zoetis. So Matt, I'm gonna pass it over to you. Would you give our audience a really quick high level who you are and what you spend on your cat and dog, and also, key thoughts around content that you're excited to explore today?
Yeah, no problem, Lindsay. So I'll just couch it with the "I'm embarrassed to tell you" category. And if it's any indication, both animals have a advent calendar. That's the extreme that we go. So we have some fun with it. But good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be on the call today. My name is Matt Coe, as Lindsay had mentioned. I lead our inside and digital sales team at Zoetis. We are the world's leader in animal health, and was really excited to join this topic today because this is just such a relevant and pertinent topic about content, and excited to share with you a little bit about what we're doing, but a lot about what we're thinking and how we're thinking about content right now, and really been partnering with Mediafly to kind of come up with some of these solutions. So really excited to get into the conversation today.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Lindsay and Matt. So hey, folks, I'm Peter Rostro. I'm part of the Revenue Enablement Research team here at Forrester Research. So we obviously cover all sorts of best practices and data sourcing and guidance and predictions around revenue enablement, content, and all the related pieces there. Our pet scenario is that for the holidays, it's a little complicated. We're probably spending in that 75 to 100 range on 3 pets of our children. So that's 2 cats and a dog. We actually have 3 little teeny lion head bunny rabbits in our possession. Lindsay knows the backstory behind that. So they're very, very cute, but they're not really, I wouldn't say they're as emotionally expressive or appreciative as dogs and cats and whatnot. So they get treats all the time, but probably nothing special for the holidays, unfortunately. But they're pretty cute. And hit me up directly and I'll send you some photos.
There we go. All right, so let's dive into the we'll put the bunnies aside for a little bit, and we'll jump into the core meat here. So I know we've all heard the anecdotes. Sales is harder than ever. Sellers have less time with buyers, and as a result, content needs to do the selling when you're not in the room or on the Zoom. A lot of this boils down to how do we actually make sure that we get above the noise and capture attention. So we did some research recently on the state of revenue enablement, and we highlighted some of the top trends in content. And some of this may, sound familiar to those of you listening, but really we're looking at 80% of buyers are saying it's important to receive content at each buying stage. So as we kick off, I'm going to throw one more poll question out to you. What do you view as the top challenge in content management today? So put that up for you, and we'll give it about 30 seconds to get responses. Don't think I'm seeing the poll yet. Matt, can you, just to clarify for the audience too, we've got somebody else on our team who is a Matt, so I'm not Matt Coe who is jumping in here. Let's give it about 10 seconds. All right, let's see the results here. All right, looks like a lot of people struggling with sellers creating and personalizing their own content. All right, that's definitely a topic. Matt, we talked about that earlier, that I know we want to be careful about, and not understanding what content works best when. So that's another piece that great, we've prepared for. So we'll hit on content governance as well. And I think that ties into the sales content outdating. Looks like the brand's not as high of a topic for today's discussion. So we can make sure that we feed this into what you all want to hear about. So let's get going, kicking it off to the roundtable. So, one of the biggest challenges that I've heard when I talk to our customers and the market, and it's something that I've also faced in our career, marketing gets told all the time, can you create this kind of content? And then it's never used. How do we actually get that content to the right person? It's definitely not a one size fits all. And I think, Matt, you're coming at this from an interesting perspective, because your team has content and you're selling into a lot of different providers. The people who are looking to support large animals and small animals, you've got a lot of different needs there. So in preparing for this webinar, you talked about digital selling at Zoetis, and how buyers are more interested and they're more willing to be a part of a digital sales cycle if you can make the experience really compelling and make it more like in person. Can you talk to everybody a little bit about what you've seen there and how you're doing that within your team?
Yeah, you bet, Lindsay. So, one of our pursuits, with leading an inside sales team, again, we call our team an inside and digital sales team, kind of intentionally, right, to really leverage that digital channel with our customers is trying to, solve this problem, create engaging content. And what Lindsay was referring to was, we kind of get a bunch of different data and studies that were done, and this particular one was done by McKinsey, where it looked at some pre and post COVID sentiment from buyers, right? And this was in the healthcare field. And so, we know that over COVID, a lot of customers adapted to these new digital channels because those were the only channels they had. And so what we wanted to really tap into is how do we make sure that they still stay comfortable with those channels? And the resounding feedback was, we like them. We just want to make sure that they feel more personal. They're more personalized, both in the interactions. That's a technology problem, right? That we're trying to solve through with Zooms and chats and things like that to kind of avoid the Zoom fatigue. But then also in the pre and post call content that we're providing those customers. When you're in person with the customer, you can kind of listen and then provide content to them. And I think what a lot of our buyers got accustomed to is this just kind of sprayed approach where you just send a bunch of content out, you kind of pray that people click on it and open it, and then somehow that's an engagement pathway to get into that customer. And we do a bit of that, but it is in that journey that we're really trying to refine. So, one of the tools that we leverage is one of the Mediafly platforms that allows us to listen to calls to really understand what is the customer saying. And we actively coach our teams to turn on that active listening skills to understand if you have a choice of maybe 7 or 8 pieces of content that you're providing that customer, are you aligning that content with what that customer's need is? Are you really listening and then tailoring that content and then your corresponding message to that? So what we're doing is we're leveraging a bunch of different things to do that, but a lot of it is on the back side of it is the coaching and just kind of going back, listening to that phone call, coaching those active listening skills, and then ensuring that our digital sellers are then providing that content to hopefully create that more in-person feeling. And then what we're finding from that is that the engagement from that content is really, really telling, right? Like if the customer is engaging with what you sent them in a significantly different way, which is what we're seeing, then, obviously that content is more tailored and more specific to them. And then where we're seeing a lack of engagement, we're kind of measuring that too, or assessing it to maybe that the content wasn't as relevant or tailored after that initial conversation. So those are kind of two of the approaches we're taking. How we're thinking about it moving forward, Lindsay, is, we're really exploring, as I assume a lot of others on this call here, is how do you start to measure things like sentiment on content? How do you start to measure, where people go in that content? Are they just opening it, or are they going through the content in terms of looking at multiple pages or watching videos? How long are they spending on the content? That's what we're thinking and starting to explore. And I think that's where really some of this stuff gets exciting for our buyers.
Yeah, I like that. We do a lot of that on our side too, which is tracking. Great, you sent this great piece of content, that they opened it, but what if they ignored the first 6 pages and went straight to the pricing page, right? That buyer is thinking very economically and they're focused more on the dollar than they are some of the platform. Or some of the product, the features. How do you go drive that next discussion using that? Or if they spent a certain amount of time on one use case, but ignored the other use cases, you start to understand how that conversation, that next step, what resonated with them. So, Peter, I know you're researching this all the time and you're talking to a lot of different companies. How would you say, what challenges are you saying people are facing and how are they looking at addressing it?
Lindsay, Matt just said something pretty interesting. He talked about, not just the opening or clicking on various artifacts, but at a deeper level, what happens beyond that click, beyond that open. And maybe we'll get probably to sort of the more technical aspect of our conversation in a couple of rounds of our roundtable. But I think there's certainly the need to know what's working and what's not working. At the end of the day, that I think populates all of our thinking when we deal with content conundrums. The bad news is what we saw in the poll, which is that a lot of folks are going rogue. But when folks go rogue, we should pay attention to why they're doing it. it probably means your content is perfectly fine, but maybe it's just mistimed in terms of the delivery to the internal sellers, the internal customers who are your audience, basically. Or maybe it's just not properly accessible to them, or maybe it's not in the moment. Your previous slide talked about, content attributes. I think another one that I would add to that would be timely. We talk a lot about activity-based revenue enablement, meaning instead of asking our customer-facing folks, sellers and other roles to go and find what they need when they think they need it, let's promote and push to them what we are pretty sure through educated guesswork they're likely to benefit from at the moment that matters, which is where they are at a trigger point in their opportunity. But it's that guesswork, which is really the AI piece replaced by the ML component that most of the solutions today now offer, where we don't just guess at what's working, but we know what's working. So if the adoption is a problem, if the going rogue is a problem, if folks are personalizing too much, and Matt said people, audience members buyers want personalized content, then it's up to us as enablers and content creators and distributors to meet that challenge. So again, if the adoption or utilization isn't great, your stuff is good, but it's just inaccessible to them, wrong time, wrong place. Your stuff is great, but it's just not communicated very well. Or heaven forbid, maybe your stuff's not great. And that's where the whole concept of making sure that we're communicating with our constituents and understanding whether what we create for them is helpful, is not helpful, a little bit of sales advocacy injected into the situation there.
I like where you're going right now. And I'm going to throw this one out. We didn't necessarily prep for this, but it's the end of the year, right? People have a couple of weeks left. So what you just hit on is sales advocacy, and is the content actually solving what people need? So everybody wants to believe their content's perfect. Do you have recommendations on what someone could go do in terms of surveying their constituents and saying, what are the top 3 questions you would ask to go check this and say, hey, are we in good shape with what we have right now as we're rounding out the year? What do we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, sales advocacy is all about listening. Look, we're all in sales. We're all in the business, or if we're an analyst, we're in the business of talking. Some days it feels like I get paid by the word. But we all know, and we were all instructed, if we had good managers of us as sellers, to sometimes use less of this. We were only given 1, and more of this because we were given 2 of those and 2 of those. Sales advocacy is about leveraging things like concierges and counsels and coaches to actually derive insights from, ideation from, feedback from the folks who are our internal customers. We all have external net promoter score initiatives. We all have customer advisory boards, but not all organizations have a sales advisory council. So whether it's through councils or surveys or just passing by someone in the hallway or at the end of a Zoom call, making sure that we're understanding, do you like what I did for you? Is it helpful what I've done for you? Is what I've done for you and created for you provided to you in a way that's helpful to you? We don't want to over survey our sellers and take precious selling time away from them to take too many surveys. But there's lots of ways on the scale of very informal to super formal to basically ask the customer, are you happy? And if we just do that ground level activity, we'd actually probably have a lot better opportunity to stop missing with some of the content and start hitting with it. It also requires, I think, Lindsay, and you alluded to this, some humility among us as content creators and distributors and managers. If you're a professional baseball player, you're in the Hall of Fame if you fail only 2/3 of the time. We've got to be willing to admit that we're going to create some real duds, and we're going to have some artifacts, if not entire campaigns, that look great on paper, but just don't get executed well. We'll actually earn a lot more credibility from folks and probably a lot less disdain and perhaps even more adoption if we take that approach.
I like it. So we're going after batting averages and not weather forecast predictions, meteorologist accuracy. So sounds good. Let's shift a little bit, because we've actually got a stat up here about the data-driven insights, and this was one of the responses in the survey, that people don't have a lot of insights to understand what's actually working for them and don't have that perspective. So I think with buyers being flushed with content and so much of the research happening before the conversation even gets to the seller, all the digital research that people are doing, that means every interaction that you have with the seller is that much more meaningful. You don't have as many, go back to the baseball analogy, you don't have as many at bats. You need to make everyone count. So how are you tracking when we look at the insights? What insights do you think matter? What would you love to know, whether you have it today or you're exploring it for next year? What data signals do you feel like, and I'm going to toss this over to you, Matt, are really influential? I think you've talked about some of the great conversation that you're looking at, and so it'd be great to share there.
Yeah, this is a really exciting topic and one we're focusing a lot on. Like I'll frame it this way: the area that we focus on with our sellers are what we call our next best actions, or NBAs, and what forms those NBAs, right? And so where our evolution in this journey is that we started out with just revenue data, like a lot of us have, and did somebody buy something? Did they not buy somebody? And that is a digital signal that we follow up on. Then when you enrich that data with things like conversation analytics, again, we leverage that platform, that then makes, the sentiment there, like, was there a reason they didn't buy it, or was there a reason that they did buy it? Then you start to add in all of these other sources of content, which makes this data so much more valuable to our sellers. Like, did they engage with a website? If they did, where did they go on the website? And then you start building this journey out, which is what we're doing with our customers right now, of then saying, okay, well, they did or didn't buy this. We heard this on the phone call. They went to this webpage. Send them this personalized content, right? Like we were just talking about. And all of this starts to create this really robust buying journey that informs the seller of, what do I talk about? When do I talk about it? And where do I pick the last conversation up on this next one? And what we're finding is that when we feed all of this information in, that our probability, or to your point, your at bat percentage just becomes so much higher, because your sellers are now informed. And not only are they informed, what one of the things that we measure is, from an inside sales perspective, kind of engagement, or like kind of fundamentally like talk time, right? And when you're bringing relevant information to a customer, that the relevance is being driven by their engagement with either your content or your products or your conversation, they're much more willing to talk to you, right? And they have these better conversations. They're more in depth. You're uncovering more opportunities to sell, more problems to solve, and ultimately selling more products. So, it is really, we think that the secret sauce is how you put these signals together to really build that, for lack of a better term, kind of lead scoring, if you will, on that customer. But the more data points you have, certainly the more robust it is.
Yeah, we like to refer to that. We call it an energy score. We bounce through all the different engagement. Where does it fit? But ultimately, we feel like, is the energy up? Are the right attributes showing? Are they, how do we calculate that? And I think with every company, it's a little bit different. What works for your brand. And it can also be different for audiences. What you're selling into large animals might, that sales cycle might be different than what you're selling into the vets that support smaller animals. So, Peter, is this a data and signals hot topic that you hear from people, and what are they hungry for? What are you counseling your clients?
Absolutely. It's kind of a cool moment right now, because, not to sound all, big analyst philosophical about it, Lindsay, but I feel like, especially with some of the capabilities that AI has introduced, not just the generative piece, which is making all the headlines for the last year, but overall, the opportunity to be smarter about our signal gathering and then actioning those signals is as strong as it's ever been. We understand a lot of analytics about our content. What happened to it? Was it opened? How long was each particular element opened? Who was it forwarded to? And when organizations are able to tightly link that first set of signals into their CRM data, it's great, because you can add to your buying group members. You have just got a better view of the opportunity through that number one lens. The number two lens that enablement professionals have in front of them is also all of the seller activity, meaning, as Matt said, the conversation or other types of biometric intelligence that we're getting information on. But also, as a subset of that number two, the learning and development, sellers going through and accessing learning exercises, learning paths, courseware, being certified, being assessed on their skills. That's a second major source of data in addition to the content data. Both of those tend to be about the specific opportunity that I'm working right now as a seller. But now suddenly we have this other triangulation, which is this third leg of the stool, which is the intelligence, not just about my deal through the seller lens and through the buyer content lens, but also through this wider lens of hundreds or thousands of other deals that my company has done that look and smell like my deal. So the opportunity to basically, long before anybody knew about generative AI, when Alexa and Siri first came out, we used to write blogs and joke about, hey, Siri, how do I close this deal? Guess what? That was futuristic at the time, and we're getting a lot closer to that at the moment. And in fact, with the generative piece that, many of these AI capabilities have, including yours right now, we're kind of pretty close to the point where, hey, Alexa, tell me how to close this deal. Or, hey, Siri, which of my appointments this week is most likely to result in, or which of my team members is modeling the behavior that the rest of the team members need to replicate, or, which of my assets are working because they represent the right product mix or, shorter sales cycles. Those are becoming closer and closer to reality. So I think the approach of thinking about it through signals is a great one.
I like it. And I think that the Siri conversation is interesting because what we're also seeing are people asking the alternative, right? Which of these deals are not going to close? Which of these deals should I stop working? If we think about our sellers, the most precious time they have, the most precious resource we have is their time, right? If they're sitting there chasing after opportunities that are showing all the wrong signals and they're still spending their day, or they're telling their manager, this is going to close, I'm going to forecast this, I've committed this opportunity, and then it's showing all the wrong signals. And in Matt's case, they're able to go back and listen to the conversations and understand that, they're either talking a lot about a competitor, they're delaying, they're canceling calls, they're pushing back on certain aspects. How do we take all that into account too, to make sure ultimately we're spending time in the right places?
Yep.
I think it's a nice segue. We're going to jump into governance here, but actually I'd love to skip ahead and go to generative AI, because Matt and his team, I always like to look at, maturity curves. And I would say that Matt and his team are ahead of the curve here on some of the stuff that you're doing with generative AI and what you're looking to roll out in the next year. And I know it's can't have a conversation, can't have a webinar without touching on it. So I'd love to jump ahead and have you share, Matt, a little bit about what your team's doing and what you're learning along the way.
Yeah, it's as Peter just kind of said as well, it's kind of these really exciting moment in time that, we've got all of these articles and insights about generative AI and what you're doing with them. And I feel really fortunate to be able to be at an organization who's leaning into it heavily and quickly early in this journey. So a couple of real exciting use cases that we're working on is, really started with, one of the products that we're leveraging from Mediafly, which listens to calls and conversation analytics. And one of the ideas we had is like, what could we do if we were able to take that at scale and tap into sentiment and ideas and things like that? And that kind of led to our pursuit down this Gen AI path. So the one use case that we're just finished up recently was that just a minimum of creating efficiency across the team. So as we're listening to call, generative AI platform that we're using can listen and transcribe the calls, but then even go farther than that to summarize the conversations, then pull out of that conversation common sentiments across products. A little bit earlier, right, we were talking about content that we're giving to customers. Like, wouldn't it be great if you had a platform that could listen to all of these conversations and make recommendations on how you should adjust your content? That's one of the things we're doing out there right now, based on what customers are responding to or how they're talking about it, or what those conversations, right? So it gives you real kind of customer insight, where previously you'd have to go out and do like kind of market research and poll customers. Well, we're getting actual feedback from these calls, and the generative AI platform is helping us summarize it. Another thing that we're doing with it is we're taking those same kind of calls, but we're putting a different lens on it, as opposed to, just kind of summarizing for internal purposes. We're summarizing those conversations for external purposes. So again, we're about halfway through the journey right now. But one, at the most basic level, it's summarizing the conversation for an email for an outbound facing customers. But then what we're really working on right now is that the generative AI platform can pick up on keywords or searches and go grab content that now is personalized to that conversation, right? So we kind of take that, if you will, a little bit out of the seller's hands to have to really be thinking through that. But the generative AI platform can say, oh, this might be insightful to that customer based on what they said, and go grab it. ultimately our seller has the opportunity to be able to look at it and review it before they send it. But these two use cases that we got so far have really produced some really exciting results that we're starting to apply. And then you keep expanding and expanding on all these different capabilities. Like one of the things that we were reading in our article recently, it said every time you kind of introduce a new technology or concept to the team, you get like at least 2 or 3 different things you weren't anticipating from it. And those 2 or 3 things are now creating new use cases and new ideas. So again, really, really exciting time of tapping into these.
That's great. Matt, we got a question while you were talking, because I think everyone's this might take its own little side conversation. But Anthony wanted to understand, are you referring to communication mining to capture the customer and buyer sentiment and creating automation to support it? So maybe you can elaborate a little bit there, but I think that's, absolutely where you're headed.
Yeah, it probably goes down a little bit of a technology path that's not my wheelhouse, but my basic understanding is there's a couple different applications that are out there in the marketplace today, and the one that we're tapping into is it basically transcribes the entire conversation based on some triggers that we set, right? Like you don't want to transcribe every conversation, you want to transcribe the meaningful ones. And then from there, what we've been doing is this iterative process of training it to then summarize it the right way, right? Like one of the things that we found early on is that what's important to our inside sales team might be slightly less important to our field sales team based on the products that you're talking about, right? So there's this kind of training process that you still have to go through to mine those insights. And then you kind of keep seeing, okay, what is it surfacing? And then same thing with content, right? Like it understands at the basic level what you want it to do. And depending on what it goes and grabs, you have to train it to say, well, that's close, but that's not exactly it. So there's this process that we've been going through. And I should really say and give credit to, we've just got an incredible technical team that's helping us through that process and really working with the team to do that. So very, very exciting.
Great. Yeah, I think one of the areas that's interesting there too is some of our customers we're really talking to them about, using generative AI to start to write that email back. So we heard the conversation, we've seen the emails that have come across, we've seen the exchanges, the lack of response, the response. How do we use generative AI to write up that conversation and then prescribe the right content there, and taking into account what the persona is, what the industry, what their previous actions are. There's a lot of elements to that. And I think one of the keys is making sure that all your data is sitting in the right place to begin with, right? So if you have your conversation data sitting somewhere, if your email data sitting somewhere else, your content engagement sits somewhere else, your whole account history is sitting in your CRM, and they're not connected, then you're going to struggle with generative AI. So I would say one of the tips that I would pass on to our audience is, if you are exploring generative AI use cases over the next year, and you're looking at that as part of your 2024 game plan, is to make sure that what the data that you want to pull from is actually all captured and living in the same land. So Peter, I don't know if you have anything to add to the
Lindsay, when would an analyst not?
Yes. Well, for our audience, Peter, I think likes to say a fool with a tool is still a fool. Did I capture that right? So
absolutely,
I think it's making sure that we're all putting ourselves in the best situation so we can be fools, but we've still got the right data, the right process, and all those pieces. And I'll let you elaborate there.
Yeah, your point was number one on our list of top 5 things that revenue enablers need to think about when it comes to generative AI, and that is keeping an eye on your data lake. Where your AI points to is job one. And if there's nothing else that anybody ever hears from me on this topic, it's that. Most of us have played around with ChatGPT, which looks at the entire internet, for better and worse. Many of us have access to ChatGPT through a controlled version that our company has put up so that we can't get customer information out there, which is fine. Some of us are building our own generative AI tools, depending on to what extent we are or are not a software provider. Many of us already have invested, Lindsay, in products like yours and your peers, where it's already there and ready for enablement folks to take the leap on it. But the number one lesson, and in the interest of time today, I'll go back to numbers 2 through 5 only if you wish, is to make sure that the tool points at artifacts that are very carefully curated, monitored, maintained, because otherwise the hallucinations and the mayhem that can ensue from the tool doing harm and not good are unmitigated.
Perfect. Well, thank you for sharing that. And just so, to reiterate, feel free to drop your questions in. We're seeing a couple of them come in, and we should have a good amount of time to address them. So I'd like to shift back a little bit more to governance now. I know it's nobody's favorite topic, but it's incredibly important. And some of the conversations that we tend to have around governance are great. This content, I hear from other marketers, sellers put 15 different fonts on this page and it looks horrible, but there is the part of it that looks horrible. And then there's part of governance that can actually really get companies in a lot of trouble. And it can be sending, outdated pricing, which could then impact the bottom line. But there's other aspects, compliance, especially, Matt, I assume that given there's a medical aspect here in healthcare, we know from most of our companies there that can get you in a lot of regulatory issues. We've got other clients that we work with that are in alcoholic beverage land or food. Those are other aspects. Any regulated industry, if you're putting out content that is has outdated, any type of elements and prescription that they're describing, you can find yourself in a lot of danger. So I'd love to spend a little bit of time about how do we make this easier both for admins as well as for the sellers. And so, Matt, I know you've got some perspective on how you keep sellers aligned and using the right content. So I'll toss it over to you first. And then Peter, I'd love to spend some time and have you dive into tips for admins so that we can make sure content is governed appropriately.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, to your point, and I think probably on the call, we've got people across lots of different industries that kind of have that different threshold for risk tolerance, right? And for us, it's about as low as it could be. The worst thing that we could do is put a pet in harm's way by sharing content that's outdated or doesn't have updated package insert information that talks about all these different things. And so when we go to kind of diagnose what that problem is, why are people sharing old content? Well, it's ease of sharing that information is kind of the number one thing that we identify. So if the platform on which we're giving our team to share content is cumbersome, or it's not easy for them to access data, like Peter was describing a little bit earlier in our conversation, they're going to find the path of least resistance. It's just the way that, right, it works. So one of the things that we find is that sometimes people will download a PDF of a content and they'll put it on their desktop, or they'll have a folder by products and they'll file things away that way. And that's the number one thing that we're trying to avoid. But for them, it's really, really easy to share that content in that way. And so this is something that we've really been working through. And then conversely, we know from our content managers that one of the challenges that we've created over the past couple of years that we've moved away or never really had a single source of truth, right? Content was stored in all sorts of different places. We'd have it on our intranet, or we'd have it in different pages, or we'd have a content management tool that, some of our sellers would use like in the field sales, but our inside sales team used a different platform. So the managers of that content had a heck of a time trying to make sure that all of that content was coordinated and all had the same information. So what we've really moved towards, and we're almost there at the end, is really focusing on this idea of like a digital asset management tool, right? That can store the content in one place and then can push it out to any number of places, but allows the management of that content all in one place. And that's really our kind of eureka. We don't have to worry about our sellers having outdated content, and it really allows our content managers to manage it in one place and be a lot more nimble, right? That's the thing that we think that really will result in it, in addition to getting, our customers the most relevant information, that it'll allow us a much more quick process to update and create new content based on what we're looking for today. That process is really drug out just because of all the different places you have to update it and maintain it. But if we can get to a place where it's a more nimble process, we think we can get back to that idea again, what we were talking about earlier, getting personal, relevant, up-to-date content into the hands of our buyers much more quickly.
Right, I like that. So make it easy to find, to share, and not to download. So Peter, back over to you. Let's talk about the admin side of things, because we can make it easy for sellers, but if it's a nightmare for admins, then we're not set up for success either.
I think the admins, Lindsay, are subservient to the sellers. I think that has to come first. If we think for one moment that our frontline sellers are at all concerned with our brand equity, we're mistaken. If we think for a moment that they're concerned with consistency and version control, then we're losing. Unfortunately, it's just the nature of the beast that if we're a servant function, as enablement I think is when it's doing its best work, we have to take into consideration the fact that just like external customers, these internal customers may not always act the way we want them to. They may change their minds. But when we survey our content managers within the enablement population in our research, we ask about the best practices. And more than today's point of personalization, more than search, more than even integration with CRM at the opportunity level, the number one best practice that we hear among content owners is that when we create content for the sales team, we are mindful about how we communicate, share, and launch it. Mindful, not in the sense of being quiet and calm mindfulness, but mindful in terms of taking into account what's going on in the world of my communicant. In other words, if this person is my internal customer, what is their life right now? If I treat them as well and as carefully and as in much of a cadenced fashion as I do my external customers, I'm more likely to think before sending. I'm more likely to think about the context of my communications of new content artifacts rather than just the convenience of when I happen to have developed them. So I think the admin piece becomes a lot easier when we acknowledge and embrace the fact that being a servant function means I think we all work for the sales organizations inside our companies. It's where our paychecks come from. It doesn't mean subservient. It means partnering in a way that serves the other member of the relationship. It just goes back to the advocacy piece that we discussed earlier. I think that the issues folks have with adoption or being ignored or version control will never go away, but they certainly can be mitigated by thinking about our sellers as if they are our customers and accepting the ups and downs that sometimes come with that.
I like that because, I can see I was going through the people that are attending right now, and I can see some people on here that I know we've worked with in terms of product launches, right? So you think about you have a new product coming out. Every seller wants to know about that. They recognize that that's a new opportunity to go bring new services or product to their customers. And if you use that as the trigger, the opportunity to get out there and say, hey, if you want to learn about this, here's where you're going to find it. If you want to deliver new value to your end users, your end customers, here's where you're going to find it. You can start to find those moments and how do you tie into what matters to them. So I agree. I certainly work for the sales organization. So I think having that right perspective is a good one. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And I think we've definitely hit on the highlights. So feel free to our audience to drop in more questions. I did get one as well on going back to the data. I think one of the aspects is that you can get super overwhelmed. Everybody can get overwhelmed with data. What is, a little bit of advice that you'd give to our audience about how to focus, not get overwhelmed by the data and be able to bring back to sellers or serve up to sellers the metrics that matter most?
Who's going first? Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Peter, and then throw it over to you. I think it's twofold. One, it's having a great thinking partner. Like one of the things that we've really worked through with our analytics team is just really trying to find those people that can help you think through the data, tease out what are the insights that you're looking for, think of the different pathways and different ideas and concepts that you can generate through it. There's just so much there that it just really does require that critical thinking when you work through it. And then the second piece of it is to involve our team in the process. The people that know the data the best or how best they can leverage it are the people that are selling every single day. So we like to bring in a team of people into that process and say, okay, here's how we're thinking about it. Here's the insights that are coming back. How can we best empower you to use this information? How do we turn this into something that's actionable and usable? And I think as we go through that process of just coming up with the ideas, the vision, pulling in our sellers to kind of help us build it out at the granular level, and then just kind of cycling through that, we've really found what we think is a pretty good recipe for success. But Peter, again, from your perspective, how are you guys thinking about it?
I think you hit some of the key points there, Matt. You talked about our partners over in the analytics team. At a certain point, organizations that have enablement teams that grow as the organization grows need to think about when and if that skill set should come inside the enablement organization. We see this Gen AI piece as pretty monumental, and we see this as a rare opportunity for enablement professionals, almost all of whom have already invested in generative AI through their revenue enablement automation, content, and learning solutions, to take a leadership position inside their organization. But if you're going to do that, it means becoming that much more fluent in things like prompt engineering, in things like analytics. And it doesn't mean that we all have to go back to school to do it, although you can go to school for prompt engineering, but to think about bringing those skill sets inside the enablement team so that we are at the vanguard, the tip of that sword, rather than following. One of the things that frustrates me a lot about our community is how often enablement teams don't have a well-honed charter, meaning that the rest of the company just dumps their homeless projects upon them and they become the doers of things and the reactors to things. This is an opportunity to take the lead using the tools that are at their disposal, and now these capabilities that represent a shift in what I think enablers need to be good at, to actually be what we call here at Forrester a true insights-driven sales system.
Yeah, one other quick thought here, as just kind of hearing you describe it, one of the steps that we've recently taken as we've been going down this generative AI pilot and a few other things. I think to your point, there's so much data and there's so much information that it can be hard, I think, for our inside sales team to understand how to use it. Like, what does it all mean? Like, we're looking at the data and trying to figure out solutions with it, but trying to figure out how it fits into kind of their everyday world, kind of what all the new terms and technology are. So one of the things that we've implemented about 6-7 months ago is a digital fluency program that we're trying to put our team through to understand what this all means. Like, where is it going? What is the end state? What does the new selling model look like for our sellers? And what should they expect from it? And we built that content, but one of the things we looked at, there's lots of content that's out there. So that would be one of my recommendations for people, that if you're starting to dive into it, educate your team on what it means. I read an article every day on it, and every day you learn something new on where these things are going. So I think an understanding and knowledge on it is just so critical right now.
I like that. You jumped ahead of me, Matt. So I was going to wrap things up with what's your one tip for the audience as they kind of go back to the rest of the day and think about what else they can knock out to prepare for a great 2024. So in addition to that, anything else you would add? I'd love the idea of reading one article, and generative AI fluency is key.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I'd add, just kind of listen to this conversation that's jumped out to me, is that like all of this that we're talking about here is really aimed at least from my lens, empowering our inside sales team with confidence, knowledge, and information to make the most of every one of those engagements. And I think the two things that we're finding is it doesn't just create a sale every time, it creates a great customer engagement. And if you can accomplish either or both of those things on a call, you're winning. And so I think what we're finding by leveraging the content, by leveraging the data that we're gleaning from it, we're hopefully empowering our team to be a part of that process. And they feel confident when they call the customer that they're talking about relevant things at the right time with the right information. And if we can arm them with that, we've got a great chance of success.
I love that. We talk a lot about, confident sellers create confident buyers, or confident customers. So if you're looking to essentially get your buyer to not pause that deal, to actually move forward, to buyers looking for every reason to back away from the sale, and a confident seller who's actually delivering value can help get them over the hump and ready to sign on that line. So Peter, I'll give you the last word.
Oh goodness. Well, the last word, I think, to sum up some of what I think I brought to the conversation today, Lindsay, is to make sure that we are revenue enablers and not revenue inflictors. There are a lot of folks who are great at producing content, great at understanding the buyer personas, great at understanding the buyer life cycle, and do a great job of producing content that is designed to support the seller-buyer interactions and consistently move those opportunities forward. But it doesn't always work. And so when we make it personal, and when we think about folks adopting what we created or using what we created or following our rules, we should stop for a moment and think, does that serve the customer, the internal and external customer? Are we thinking in an outside-in fashion? We all get caught up in our own production. We get caught up in our own egos and our own processes and rules. But sometimes just taking that lens and reapplying it to what we're doing helps us remember how to be servants to our true customers.
Love it. I think actually, and I'm going to steal the last word, but if we go back to what Matt said in the beginning, how do we become active listeners too? So Matt, you're coaching your sellers and you're using technology to be active listeners. I think the same would go. And what you're talking about, Peter, is how do we actually listen to our constituents to make sure we're producing content that makes an impact. So I want to thank you both for your time. Thank you to the audience for joining. We'll be sending out a recording in case you want to share this around. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us, and have a great end of the year. Finish strong.